Welcome back to the Bucket Bros, everybody. I'm your host, Ronnie West, back with my guy, Bobby Marcico. What's going on,
What
Bobby?
up?
Hey, it has been a wonderful week of NBA basketball that we have been taking in the last week. It's been a fun start to December as we kind of get into it. The Wolves have been playing a little bit better, so that gives me some hope. And there's been a lot of good action around the league. You got to go to a game. I'm going to one this weekend. So yeah, we're getting excited for getting into the heart of the basketball season.
Yeah, highly recommend. Make sure you make your way out to a game too. Get your tickets. Get your tickets. There was definitely some great games over the weekend. A whole lot of them. We're gonna get into that a little bit. Talking about Memphis. Are they the real deal? And the Cavs, boy, they just keep winning games.
As well as getting into a bunch of NBA topics on Fast Break News, which we'll get into right now.
All right, and we're about to jump into our fast break news. We're going to lead off with some bad news, unfortunately. Franz Wagner, torn right oblique. Torn right oblique. Now, this
Oh,
is kind of an unusual injury in the first place. It's even more unusual that the two best players on the Orlando Magic have suffered the same injury on the same side, not more than 2 months apart. Now, as Franz sustains this injury, we're getting to the point where we're waiting for the update on recovery for Paulo Banchero. Unfortunately, this puts Franz out indefinitely. He's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks, which just means a progress check. Just like with any muscle injury, muscle belly injury, these are tough to recover from. They do take a lot of time. It's different. It's different than a sprain. It's different than a fracture. I mean, if I told you that somebody tore their quad, you would think they would be out for the season easily. So, obviously, this type of injury, different part of the body, and so based on how it's graded, it really kind of gauges what the recovery period is going to be like. Clearly, in either case, it's not surgical, but tough break for the Magic, who have been on a tear this season. I feel like going into the season, you were really, really high on them, and I was sort of downplaying any sort of leap that I thought they would make. Not that I didn't think they were going to be competitive, but early on, they're third in the West. Obviously, they've been on a tear recently with Paolo out and Franz just playing the best basketball of his career in quite a stretch. So definitely a big hit for them. It definitely makes you wonder what the rest of their season is going to be like moving forward. Anytime you would tell me that a playoff team is down their two best players with an injury that is likely to keep them out for months, I would not have high hopes for how the rest of the season was going to be. Any thoughts on whether or not you think the Magic could stay afloat until both these guys recover?
I don't. I think they're definitely going to start struggling now. I think that's Franz was carrying that team. Had 7 30-point games kind of since Paulo's injury. So just his ability to kind of take over a game. I like the Magic's setup. I think they're probably slightly sub 500 team without those two, probably for the time being. I think I think it's going to be really tough. It's I was telling you before, it's the Jalen Suggs show. There's a few other guys I think that can kind of get some scoring, but not in the way that Wagner was. You just kind of hope that both of the injuries can kind of come back quick. And even though I think, like you mentioned, it's one of those things. It's not an easy fix. This is one of those that's going to aggravate or can be easily re-aggravated just by a simple tweak or a move. So yeah, this is. I don't want to say it's doom and gloom for them, but it's not looking pretty right now down in Orlando.
Yeah, and obviously this is a team that is built heavily on its defense. They, once again have one of the top defenses in the league this year, and so you feel like maybe they can float around, like you said, near 500. just by playing stout defense until they can get their best players back. We are about to see a whole lot of Cole Anthony minutes. It's going to be a little bit of a throwback for this team. He's probably going to have to really lead this offense moving forward for a bit. But anyway, I could talk about this for a while, but let me toss it over to you, Ronnie.
So one of the things that at least jumped out at me that I think a lot of people have noticed, or at least it's been on social media a bunch, was when John Morant said he wasn't going to be dunking anymore, and yet here he is pulling like double reverse slams and different alley-oops, and just his highlight reel has just been amazing. The Grizzlies have been on fire. It's kind of exciting to think, like, even with some of their injuries, that when they get healthy, this team is going to be ridiculously dangerous out west. So what are your thoughts on this? I'll probably have some John Morant highlights thrown in here in the mix, but what are your thoughts here on Memphis going forward?
Well, I could save that talk for a little bit later in the episode, as I was planning to.
Tease.
Um,
Sorry.
Yeah, because I'm gonna let you know right now. I'm gonna spoil this one. I'm very, very high on Memphis.
Nice.
I was definitely going into the season. I was of the few who were saying, hey, we forgot about this team. They're gonna be probably at the top of the West, making things even more complicated out there. And yeah. I mean, we'll go into a little bit more detail in a little bit, but they are looking ferocious.
Yep. Pull back. What other items jumped out at you this past week?
Well, let's see, off the top of my head, I would say Paul Millsap retiring. That's a big one. Man, that guy has spanned so many eras and been a part of a lot of winning teams. I mean, when you think of Paul Millsap, what rendition of his career comes to mind?
What's funny is that what comes to mind first, and I want to make sure I get it right, even though was about to get that wrong, was his college career. He had a really good NCAA tournament with Louisiana Tech. I think they won like 2 games. I don't want to be completely wrong, but he had a really solid last. I want to say he played all 4 years while he was there. And he was just one of those guys that kind of jumped out. For me, it'd probably be in the NBA as far as that goes, would be the Hawks. I think his Hawks era was probably what kind of jumped out at me the most. I don't know if that was maybe one of his longer tenured spots. But yeah, he always was one of those guys that just seemed gritty, really big, could handle a lot of those. To me, he seemed kind of like the modern day, not skill wise, body type wise, would be like Karl Malone is kind of like my comp that I can kind of think of as far as the way that he could body people down in the block. And that's kind of where he was. He wasn't like a running gunner like the mailman was, with a lot of fast breaks, but no, definitely a great defender, quality player. But yeah, it's bravo, great career. It's definitely one of those that kind of you remember and kind of has not a amazing impact on my basketball tenure, but somebody that you can kind of look at and be like, man, that guy had a really great career, and somebody that kind of stood out. Sorry, do you have anything else to say on this? I didn't want to interrupt any Paul Millsap love.
No, I mean, I would say, looking at it, I forget, but yeah, his longest tenure was actually with the Utah, with whom he started his career with, but I also think of those Atlanta years when I think of Paul Millsap. A lot of wins out there, and then of course his stint with Denver, which was kind of essentially how he finished off his career. He was definitely a part of the Denver team that was on the rise with the early Jokic MVP years, and yeah, he was definitely a big part of that team before things started to click. It's a shame that he didn't actually get to win a ring with them, considering how much success he had with that team as well. But yeah, I like the Karl Malone comp. That's a good one. He was a little kind of like a thicker, slightly undersized power forward, but sort of like a do-it-all scoring type and tenacious on defense. So you will be missed, Paul Millsap. And with that, I'm gonna throw it back to you.
So one of the things that
For the listeners at home, by the way, we're prop podcasters right now. I'm holding a mini basketball, which has a lot of bite marks in it because my son plays with it. But yeah, that's any commotion you're hearing in your vehicle that doesn't make sense to you. I'm throwing or pretending to throw a toy basketball to Ronnie from Charlotte to Chicago. But as you were, what stood out to you?
You're breaking the fourth wall, Bobby. So I have to give credit where credit's due. So this is from @Statline on Instagram. It was a list of the top 4 through the first 5 weeks of the season. The top, or this, here's your trivia, Bobby. Maybe unless you already saw it. The top 4 players with the most minutes played so far this season. Do you got any wild guesses as to who any of those top 4 could be?
Let's see. I definitely have been hearing some buzz about this. I'm gonna say Mikal Bridges.
Correct. He is number 1 with 696 minutes played.
Are the other 3 Knicks players as well?
Not all 3.
Okay. Who? Jokic.
Nope.
Wow, really? I thought he was up there.
It is somebody from out west. There is a player from out west.
Who is leading in minutes? I guess this is total minutes played. So
5.
any games missed at this point? LeBron? Not LeBron.
No. You're done. You're cut off. So number 1, Mikal Bridges, 696 minutes. Number 2, Josh Hart of the New York Knicks, 679 minutes. Number 3, De'Aaron Fox, 675 minutes. And number 4, OG Anunoby with 665 minutes played. So Thibodeau being Tibbs being Tibbs. Like, it's not a surprise to anybody that's in Minnesota, Chicago, or anywhere else that Thibodeau has landed. You just know he's going to wear those guys out.
Tibbs really coming out of his comfort zone. Yeah. By the way, from hearing other people speak, by the way, I feel like we've been saying it wrong this whole time, and the rest of the world is trying to correct us. I think we're supposed to be saying Thibs and Thibodeau. That sounds way worse, but I think that's the real pronunciation. I'm never not going to call him Tibbs, though. How do you know?
I'm a Minnesotan who lives in Chicago. We call him Tibbs. Like, that's just regardless of everybody calls Denzel Washington Denzel. So it's like we've decided to ignore what the person's name is and just call him whatever we want. So I'm calling him Tibbs.
Fair enough. Well, with that, I'm gonna toss it to you again. I'm going for assists tonight.
Ooh, speaking of assists, I was watching this game with the New Orleans Pelicans, and Alfred Payton was going nuts. Like, I had the stat line up from the NBA League Pass, and she could watch their stat lines as they're playing, and his assist total just kept going up and up and up. And he ended the game with 21 assists, and I was like, oh, man. And I just missed the cutoff for last week's episode. I was going to give him a shout-out. And unfortunately, the Pelicans cut him a week later, and he's no longer on the team. So it's just one of those things. You kind of have the way of the NBA. You can have a good game, but you will get that axe at some point, whether it was something in-house or just whatever it might have been. Money-wise, he had to be let go. So, yeah, that's unfortunate for him. Only other thing that I have here listed for Fast Break News was, and if anybody knows me, one Halloween I dressed up as Tyrone Biggums, probably the greatest Halloween of 2003, the best costume. Me and Napoleon Dynamite rocking every party we went to. But good old Kyle Kuzma decided to get Tyrone Biggums tattooed on his calf, which I have to I guess I kind of get an applause, but it's a little overcommitment. To me, I felt like just doing the Halloween character was good enough for me. I didn't feel like I needed to give a greater ode to Dave Chappelle than that. Yeah, so just some surprising fast break news.
That when that character was born, was that the year also Kyle Kuzma was born?
Probably pretty close. He's got to be a '90s baby. Uh-oh. Speaking of
Let's hit,
babies,
yeah, let's hit pause. I gotta go take care of this.
so as Bobby tends to his child, I wanted to give you guys a quick Wolves wrap over the last few games. They've been out west in California playing the Clippers and the Warriors twice. They started the trip in the Intuit Dome in LA and took on the Clippers and pretty much found their defensive identity again. I think something just clicked. Like they were able, and it wasn't one of those things that happened right away. It took until about the second quarter, and then they all of a sudden, you could see it on the court. Like something happened where they were finally able to kind of get it together and the full team, like the bench, was able to kind of get in there too. Like it carried over from when the starters kind of set the tone, and then from there on out, they ended up just blowing out the Clippers. And then that definitely carried over to the following game against the Warriors, where their defense just kind of clamped down. It was a close game, but they did manage to get away with the victory. And then the last game, I'm sure plenty of you have seen the highlights of Draymond taking the ball at the point, kind of coordinating the play, and then going down and getting dunked on Gobert, which kind of sealed the deal. But the Wolves are, I think that puts them at like 12 and 11, so just above 500. They've been managing to kind of put some pieces together. I know it's still early in the season and they're still getting the kind of gel with all the guys going. I like the fact that Chris Finch is using more of the bench. Dillingham is getting some more solid minutes, as well as Josh Minot. I wish there was a few other guys on the bench that could kind of come in and help to kind of push to that 10, 11, 12 depth. But at least right now, it's just not something that's happening. And I do have to have a correction. I was wrong in the last episode with the NBA Cup games. So this week, they do not have off. The Wolves will be playing the Spurs and the Lakers. I believe it's the Lakers are on Thursday, and then the Spurs the following Monday or Tuesday. And then they're back into their regular schedule. So we'll kind of see how the next few games go. I think they're split with the Lakers right now, and the Spurs kind of dominated them down in Area 51, dealing with Wemby and Castle and CP3, who we have to give a hats nod to. Chris Paul moves into number 2 in the all-time assist category, passing Jason Kidd. He is now 8 assists ahead in number 2 and has a ways to go behind John Stockton. And that's going to do it for our kind of quick recap of the Wolves over the last week. And we'll get back into it in just a little bit.
So we're going to jump into a little bit more NBA basketball here. I personally wanted to zoom in a little bit, as we alluded to earlier, on the Memphis Grizzlies in light of I would call it an inspiring win against the Boston Celtics on Sunday. I felt like Sunday overall was a pretty good day of basketball, and for those who had a chance to tune into that game, I mean, we definitely saw a Memphis team who just looks like they are absolutely rolling. They clearly feel very confident with their playing style, with sort of like the hierarchy of players that they have at this point. Ja himself is just an absolute monster. He can seemingly get anywhere he wants on the court to get the look that he wants. And they have won, as we record this, 9 out of their past 10, with one of the losses, with their one loss coming from the Dallas Mavericks in a close game. Prior to that, this run, they did split a pair of games between the Denver Nuggets. And I mean, certainly they're not beating like the best teams on this stretch up until recently, but like I said, this Celtics win was kind of a monster. I'm sure you've heard this already, but they clearly had the strategy of letting Drew Holiday sort of be the one thing that they were willing to give up on. He put up a boatload of threes during that game. I believe 4 of 17 was the final number for Drew Holiday. Yeah, and and it was I wouldn't say a great shooting night from many of the players for the Celtics that game. And to be honest, I give that a big testament to the Memphis Grizzlies defense. We kind of knew going in that they have good defenders on that team. Jaren Jackson Jr. They had Brandon Clark starting that night as the rookie whose name for some reason is escaping. Zach Edey has been out lately. So they had the tandem of Triple J and Brandon Clark that night, and they looked phenomenal together. I would say even going down the line, they had individually defensive great performances as far as Jake LaRavia. I mean, everybody looked like they were doing their part playing one-on-one defense. The Memphis Grizzlies took control of that game pretty early and essentially held on to their lead the whole time. Boston did make a comeback, and they did steal the lead for a little bit in the fourth quarter in particular. But yeah, I mean, Ja looks like, as I've mentioned already, an absolute monster. He's able to get where he wants. He's setting up his teammates extremely well. I feel like as much as we talk about his high flying antics, whether he's trying to dunk or not these days, he really sets up his teammates spectacularly. I mean, I think he had this great 2-man game going that night with Brandon Clark. There was a couple lobs and then one another pass, I know, right around the rim that he was able to get a good look for him. I would say a little bit of leeway to Boston. They were coming off of a back-to-back against Milwaukee, and that was a close game as well for them. And that was also their 5th game in a 7-day stretch. And they don't play again until Thursday, so a nice little break for them. But one thing Memphis was able to do that game is make Boston look beatable. Boston was definitely still trying to play their 5-out 3-point game. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were certainly trying to make things happen, create mismatches, collapse defense, and Memphis was sticking to their strategy. We're gonna let Drew Holiday shoot, and it worked out for them. You can certainly say that Boston was doing the same thing against Ja, and he made them pay. So perhaps on a different night where Drew just decided to light it up, this game could certainly gone a different way for them. But I mean, they are sort of exposing a potential weakness for Boston. We'll see how that has to go. One other thing I wanted to note was that I don't want to rag on the Celtics too much here because Jaylen Brown just looked unstoppable against Memphis. Nobody could really guard him that game. I think all the extra 20 pounds he put in his arms over the summer were really paying off that one. Although whenever they would cut to Jaylen Brown and then subsequently to Desmond Bane, I felt like I just want to see the two of them arm wrestle, as they clearly seem to be competing for biggest biceps in the NBA. Speaking of Desmond Bane, also just looks spectacular. I just feel like I could keep going on and about this, but Memphis just had wave after wave of competent offensive player, guy who could put the ball in their hands. I really liked Triple J as a scoring option. He's going to shoot his fair share of threes. He kind of has a decent shot, kind of a little bit flat, but it does go in. But he wasn't relying on that. He was anytime he was seeing a mismatch in particular, he would just put the ball on the floor, put his back to the basket, weave back and forth, back him down, and was getting these 5 to 10 foot hooks with either hand that were going in seemingly almost every time. I mean, even there was a time or two against Porzingis where he didn't yield at all to the big man. So these guys are playing with a lot of confidence. As of right now, they stand number 2 in the West and just half a game above the Rockets and the Mavericks. And I think this is real. I mean, I know it's just one game and you don't want to overact, but they are starting to look like a contender.
Yeah. No, I agree with a lot of stuff. I may be repping the Celtics jersey, but I definitely think the Grizzlies, they definitely took advantage of some things. Like you said, forcing Drew Holiday's hand is one thing. versus being able to kind of take out the other two. It's funny here thinking that with all the stuff that we hear about Ja Moran, I was just watching his sports science about how he's as explosive as an Olympic long jumper with his ability to kind of jump. His jumping ability is at the same speed at like 21 miles an hour as he jumps to go dunk. So all those spectacular things and stuff that we see, he doesn't lead the team in scoring. Like I'm looking at all of the major stats for the Grizzlies, and he's not a leader in any of them. Jaren Jackson Jr. leads the team in points at 21.9. My man Santi Aldama in rebounds at 7.5. Scottie Pippen Jr. 5.4 assists a game. Marcus Smart 1.5 steals. And then Jaren Jackson Jr. with 1.9 blocks. So, like, Ja's not even leading any category in his team, but we all know that this is his team. But it also goes to the fact of what you were just saying of how deep this team is. The fact that there's a bunch of these guys that, like you said, you feel confident with them in the game, and like if you've got Bain as like a fourth option on the floor, sometimes that's just kind of it's just ridiculous to think about. Granted, he's not a super offensive guy that like I'm trying to say that he's the next whoever it might, Anthony Edwards or something, but the fact that you've got these solid, competent players just prove that the Grizzlies are going to be a team to contend with when it comes to the spring.
Yeah, I mean, you would expect Desmond Bain to be their second offensive option, but not with Santi Aldama playing this way. You mentioned their depth. I mean, they really kind of are like Cavs West right now in that regard, and that they have a lot of guys in the rotation who are really stepping up and hitting at the right time. And that's not including Marcus Smart, who is not quite looking quite like his Boston days lately. I know he's been dealing with a lot of injuries lately, but yeah, kind of a shaky last couple of years for him. But yeah, I mean to completely oppose the Knicks, the three highest minutes getters per game anyway on Memphis are Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, Desmond Bain, all at 28 minutes a game. Their top three players are playing 28 minutes a game right now. So they have a lot of guys they can go to. They have a lot of guys that are stepping up. I think it's going to be a good regular season for them at this rate. And I'm seeing some elements of their play that I think are going to carry over to the playoffs. Again, don't want to jump the gun too much here, but it is very early in the season. But I think they're going to be the real deal.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, like you said, the minutes played. They have 15 guys that average over 10 minutes a game. Like that's just the fact that you can have, and granted, it's early in the season, and obviously we've had some injuries kind of mix in, but that's a deep team. That's a lot of young players getting minutes. Granted, my guy Yuki's only getting 3 minutes a game, but the fact that like those other guys are getting on the floor and getting these minutes, getting experience. It's even if it's like the bottom of the bench players, the fact that they can get in and get that time, I think, is something that's going to be helpful.
So now we're going to jump into a little bit of Cavs Hornets. I know not the hottest topic these days, but I did get to go finally to a Hornets home game. I picked a 1 p.m. Sunday game just because that's what I could make work. Finally, got to watch a Hornets game this year, not subject to blackout restrictions. And LaMelo didn't play. Miles Bridges still out. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But Mark Williams was back. He's been back for a few games, and he does seem to be on a minutes restriction currently. But in the minutes that he was able to play, I think he looked great. He had 12 first half points. He was certainly attacking around the basket a lot of putbacks, which is I feel like a lot for somebody going up against the front court of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Speaking of, we can't go a podcast obviously without mentioning Evan Mobley. Boy, did I pick a game to go to. He came out really hot. He had, if I'm not mistaken, 28 points in the first half. Yeah, that's right. 28 of his 41 in the first half. He made his first 5 3-pointers. Go figure. And that and ultimately the Cavs just came out just screaming. I mean, they finished the quarter 40 to 18 the first quarter against the Hornets. They had 14 team assists in the first quarter. Granted, I'm sure at least half of them with Evan Mobley. But the Hornets definitely made it a competitive game. They didn't look great. Certainly, we can talk a little bit about how the extreme increase in three-point field goal attempts going up across the league and seeming to be and a few teams being at like record-setting pace in that regard. The Hornets definitely one of those teams. Perhaps to their detriment, though. It's not. It doesn't look pretty as it does with some teams, like the Celtics. You know, the pile-on nature of the not the pile-on. Sorry, the copycat nature of the increased three-point volume. I don't think is really working for anybody. Just to wrap up that game, ultimately there was a little bit of complacency from the Cavs. I feel like in the second half, but they never let the Hornets get closer than 5 points in that game. They were able to close it out. I guess kudos to Charlotte for fighting to stay in the game. And certainly, I feel like the Cavs could have given themselves a little bit more of a night off, considering all the injuries the Hornets have faced lately in the squad that they've had to go in with. All credit to them. But yeah, ultimately, great atmosphere, great game. Highly recommend going to a Hornets game. We talked about this a little bit last week. I did get sucked into the colors a little bit. The geometric beehive structure of the court art that they have is there even during non-tournament games. So it was pretty great overall. Highly recommend.
No, it's cool. I think one of the takeaways, I've been seeing a lot of highlights, and since you got to see him in person, I'm curious to have your takeaways of Brandon Miller and what your thoughts of him and as far as his look and the way his explosive plays can kind of work with the Hornets.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this was necessarily the best Brandon Miller display one could see. He certainly came out a little bit cold. He he was able to hit his stride a little bit more in the second half. I'm sorry, in the second quarter. But he
I'm thinking more
definitely
long
showed
term
me.
now with extra. There's obviously going to be some playing minutes. What do you think his development's going to kind of look like here in the next few weeks? I didn't mean so specifically to that specific game, but just kind of your takeaways is kind of how his game may evolve here over the next few weeks with some other injuries that kind of give him some time.
Yeah, so I was getting into that, maybe just not quickly enough. So thank you for helping us speed things along, because I can be a little bit verbose on these topics
No,
sometimes. I realize that,
all good.
but he's definitely not a primary ball handling option. You could see, especially against a Cavs team, sort of just how limited some of his offensive tools are. His shot looks great, and I think he's the perfect kind of guy to play off a player like LaMelo Ball. I think they really make a good duo. Obviously the Hornets sort of surprised everybody when they selected him over Scoot Henderson. To some degree, but they were definitely trying not to double up on the same type of player, and it looks like they made a good pick overall. We'll see how things play out over time, as Scoot Henderson definitely starting to look like he's coming into his own this year. But yeah, I mean, I do think Brandon Miller could potentially be a really solid number two scoring option with all of his length and athleticism. You expect him to contribute on the defensive end as well, at least develop into that player. Not to say that he hasn't looked okay on defense, but I mean, I think he's got a little bit of work left to do in that regard as well. So trying to be the number one guy out there, it's not a great look for him at this point. That may change over time, but yeah, I think ultimately that's not his game. I do think though that he can be a really high functioning, number two or number three guy on a good squad.
Yeah, and obviously the Cavs have been on a tear. They're number one in the East, and like you said, Mobley's been uh, kind of just kind of dominating the play. What about Mitchell? Did he? I'm not sure specifically of the game, but was he one of those that kind of you caught he caught your eye when you were watching kind of the play and the flow during the game?
I mean, Spida always looks amazing. You know, he's definitely somebody who's kind of on the fringe of this category, but I think is a guy who could be the best player on a finals contender. And he didn't have to have a big game. That was kind of
Mhm.
one of the fun things about the game I went to, and with honestly with a lot of the games that I've watched with Cleveland this year is I feel like I always catch Evan. I'm sorry, I always catch Donovan Mitchell on not necessarily an off night, but a night where somebody else is hot and he's not trying to steal the ball at all.
Yeah,
Um, you know, he's kind of just taking the shots that are coming to him, and when their momentum starts to slide a little bit, you could tell that he'll step it up and be that guy. He'll sort of take on, you know, a few possessions at a time, where he sort of just plays his ISO ball, but tries to get to a spot and make a big bucket. And he certainly had a couple big threes that he was I think he was in like single digit scoring, and then all of a sudden just had a couple big threes when the Hornets were trying to make their comeback and finally got it to single digits. And you know, that's just sort of that sort of like tide changing, I'm going to put out your flame type moment that he can sort of seemingly conjure at will. And so the fact that the Cavs have that but don't need it, which they did a lot last year, and they don't seem to need it as much this year, I think is kind of that. It's sort of that ace in the hole that they can, that it's that card that they can just hang on to, you know, at any point. And I mean, we all know Donovan Mitchell can score. I mean, he's one of very few players who put up 70 points in a game. Granted, it was against the Hapless Bulls last year, but
doesn't
yeah, I
matter.
mean, yeah, still a lot of fun to watch though, even if he's not taking, you know, even if he's not a high usage guy that night.
The last thing I have on the Cavs, aside from Garland, the game that I watched, he was a nugget killer. Kind of just kept driving the lane and just ended that game. Um, was one thing I'm curious to know your thoughts on the Cavs bench. One of the things that I kept kind of noticing and things that I was seeing was like Karis LeVert kind of getting some quality shots. Obviously, I think he started maybe a couple times, but he's not like their regular starter. But just the depth of their bench, I think, is something that's going to help them continue on this great pace that they're on.
Yeah, and one thing that we brought up, and we kind of talked about this a little bit with Memphis as well, is you know when you kind of expect your best players to be at their best, right? And you know, and so there was kind of this lingering question that's still lingering, I suppose, to some degree, about a team that their two best players or their two best offensive options are small guards. You know, can a team? I mean, heck, we always say like, can a team where their best player is a small guard, you know, is that going to be a consistent finals contender ever? Right? You know, Allen Iverson, he had one shot, right? I mean, Steph Curry, obviously, he breaks that mold with just being able to shoot with his eyes closed. But you know, more realistically, for the average guy, for the average superstar, smaller guard, you know, and you know, we could put John Morant in this conversation too. Like, can they make it happen? You know, in this particular game, I think Isaac Okoro has still been out. Um, Ty Jerome didn't necessarily have the most standout game, but he's obviously been having a great year. He was leading the league in effective field goal percentage, might still be. Karis LeVert, you know, he's kind of always been just like a sturdy option. He has these like surprising skills that can pop. You know, when they do pop on the right nights, particularly when he can get to the hoop very very well, and he could be your lead ball handler, playmaker. You know, he can be a guy for a stretch of games who will get like double doubles or like 15.8 assist nights if you need him to. You know, I've always kind of looked at Georges Niang as a good player. I do feel like he's been getting a lot more minutes than I would have expected him to this year. Again, in particular, because Okoro just hasn't quite been there. Just has been dealing with health issues. But he brings a certain ferocity. even when he's given the assignment of having to guard the best wing player on the other team all night long. And you know what? He gets embarrassed on some of those plays, but he's fighting every single time he's out there. So, Sam Merrill obviously has been giving them some good minutes, good shooter. Game I saw in particular, he wasn't really hitting them that night. But I would say in general, it wasn't even like a big bench night. The Cavs have had a lot of those. But the game I was at wasn't necessarily that type of game. But in general, a guy I forgot to mention, Dean Wade, who did start for them that night, but he's just also been a solid rotation player for them over the past few seasons now.
He was one of those. Sorry to interrupt, but he was one of those when I was watching the Cavs game. It took me probably like 4 or 5 listens to realize his name was Dean. And I kept thinking, why are they calling him D Wade? And I was like, he's not D Wade. That it took me, like, I finally had to like go online, like, oh, this is Dean Wade. I got it now. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that was just one of those funny things that I was like, D Wade is retired. We just made fun of his statue. Like, what are you talking about? So, anyways,
yeah. No, anytime I would look at box scores before I really knew who this guy was. Anytime I look at box scores, I'm like, D Wade's back on the Cavs, because that's how his name is displayed, D. Wade. Yeah. But no, he's definitely not Dwayne Wade. I'm not sure he aspires to be Dwayne Wade. I think he's probably, if anything, he's probably trying to separate himself. All the comparisons he gets with the namesake, but no, he's like I said, he's a good rotation player. Zach Lowe, actually. Gosh, I can't wait for him to put up more content. But Zach Lowe used to have a running joke about Dean Wade. He sounds like an accountant. Like, just his name reminds me of like, just like a very reliable guy. And that's kind of what he is on the court as well.
Nice. I don't have
so go Dean Wade. Let's end on that note with the Cavs. Go Dean Wade.
There you go. All right, Bobby. I got a couple things here about your old town Philadelphia 76ers. They kind of came across my social feed and I found them quite funny. It's just one of those things where you got the Sixers and I think they've been winning a little bit. I saw that they kind of moved up the standings. They're not in the bottom of the barrel. It kind of leaves that to the Wizards now and whoever else that's there. So the Sixers are kind of making some strides, getting kind of chipping back and getting into it. I had notes, at least on the team, Maxime McClain, they're definitely both able to kind of create their own shot. But I definitely think that they're still a little immature and need to grow. But I think that being able to do that together will be good, but I think it's going to get interrupted when like Paul and Joel come back. So who knows how that chemistry is going to go.
McCain, by the way, I think you were watching Die Hard while watching the Sixers game simultaneously. It's not McClain. You said McClain.
I keep thinking of like Buddy McClain. I don't know what I've seen that has that name is just stuck in my head. So again, another one.
Jared McCain.
Hold on. We'll start it now. I've got like a name jar. I've got $1 to put into the name jar. I'm messing up. We'll put that back there, and eventually those proceeds will go towards something good. So you got me on that one. I'll make sure to keep cash whenever we do podcast episodes. But I've got 2 things about Joel Embiid and Paul George. The first one, everybody kind of makes fun of Paul George and calls him Playoff P. But I think I got to give it to somebody else, calling him Podcast P, because he's played 12 games this season, but he's managed to do 16 podcast episodes since the start of the year. So 4 more of those than games played. So bravo on you, Paul, for being Podcast P and getting those done. Better than us. He's doing better than us. So we've gotten 12 done since the Olympics. So he's done at least 16 since the start of the season. So that's impressive. I got to tell you that. That's a lot of solid work. I'm sure he's not editing.
We need to get into that Playoff P mentality.
Yeah, I think
Let's get our
so.
podcast game down.
My favorite
What
one,
should
though,
we go out and tear our ACL so that we can increase
I've
our
already torn
podcast
both
frequency?
Achilles, so I don't think I need to do any other leg damage.
Sorry, that
Uh,
was such a crude joke. I'm sorry, Paul George. You're amazing. I love you.
the next shot I'm taking is at Joel Embiid. Um, and it's funny because as of this post, he had played 4 games for injury management. Uh, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers was shot in the chest before the start of the season and has played 5 games in the NFL. So Joel Embiid can't come back faster than a guy who was shot in the chest. So just do some podcasts, stay home and keep your money. Go 76ers. Reaction, Bobby. Any reaction to
Reactions to that? Yeah, I mean, Paul George has been back the past couple games. They finally got real minutes in the last game against the Bulls that they won with Joel Embiid and Paul George on the floor together. It happened. It finally happened. Tyrese Maxey was there too.
oh man,
Pretty momentous occasion.
Buddy McLean?
Yeah, and Embiid actually looked pretty decent coming down the stretch of that game. Now, poor Jared McCain seems to be essentially benched if PG is starting. I mean, not too surprisingly there, right? We didn't expect McCain to get heavy usage and be a front runner for Rookie of the Year this year with the squad that they built in the offseason. However, I mean, the 4 wins in the past 5 games that they played, they split a couple against the Magic. I would say that's probably in that stretch that's the only winning team that they did beat. But yeah, I mean they're finally sort of starting to claw their way back. I'm still a little skeptical. I didn't think it was possible a couple of weeks ago, as we talked about on the podcast, but it's starting to look like a little bit of reality. I guess the saving grace in the East is even at 7-15, they are a game and a half away from being a play-in possible team. So I suppose I do like their odds at actually having a shot at the playoffs, even if there are some injury struggles that continue. Now, hopefully, you know, I think Joel is just going to have to deal with this knee issue basically forever from now on, and so hopefully it can be managed well enough to where he can stay on the floor for most of available games. Is that going to be enough to push him forward? Even if they do make it to the playoffs, if he's hobbling, if their best player is hobbling, and they haven't been able to string together more than like 40 games of continuity with essentially a new team at this point, I'm I'm still not liking their odds overall for being competitors, but it is looking a little bit more promising. I feel like Milwaukee's already broke that threshold of like we can finally start talking about them as a winning team. Can't quite get there with the Sixers yet, but
It's
yeah,
early. It's still very early.
some early promise. Yeah,
Yeah, it's to me. It's I guess it's always that adage. I'm not a 7 foot or 7'2", 300 pound, whatever he is. To me, it's if I feel like for the amount of load management that is done, I want to see him and Kawhi like in wheelchairs, like outside of the game. Like you're not using that knee. Like you're making millions of dollars. You can walk around at home, but like anywhere else, I feel like you need to be chauffeured and escorted. If he's ever in any 76ers team center, like he needs to be in a boot, like in an air cast, in a wheelchair, just to make
bubble
sure that
wrapped.
he's bubble wrap just to make sure nothing happens and then gets to the floor and can play his allotted 10 minutes a game and then play every game. To me, it's again, uh, obviously we've had Greg Oden's, Sam Bowie's, or whoever else with different injuries because of these just large bodies. And the fact that somebody my age who kind of saw Shaq and like, man, he's still doing fine. Like, why can't you do that? Is kind of the assumption that we have with a lot of these big men. So that's the only reason I take shots. I have no idea how that my body barely handles this 200-pound weight, much less being stretched another foot and have another 100 pounds on my body. Like I have no idea how my bones would react. So I think that's a big part of all of this too, is that the human DNA is being stretched beyond belief. I can see, and we talked about this before back when we play FIFA, of like, when are we going to see like a Shaq LeBron, like somebody who can move like LeBron, who's the size of Shaq, and can actually sustain his body? Is that something that's going to be possible? Who's 7'2"? Imagine if Wemby all of a sudden just started eating and lifting and became like this 270-pound monster. And it's, to me, it's like, that's bound to happen just because of genetics and people realizing like, hey, I can do these things. So it's curious. I only kid, but I definitely, it's disappointing not seeing him on the floor. But the way, and the drama and everything behind the scenes, and obviously the Sixers are not the best run organization with the way that they can handle a lot of different things and their perceptions, and just kind of the whole trust the process that's just kind of laughable now. So to me, that's where all of this kind of leads, and we'll see. Like we said before, I think the Sixers, nothing's over. They're going to have a decent shot at getting into the playoffs, and then once you're in, who knows what you can do. So once everybody's healthy and you have all these guys ready to go, then yeah, who knows? All right, Bobby, we're going to wrap up this Bucket Bros episode, but I've got one last question for you. It's kind of
Oh
putting you
boy.
on the spot, and I'm not sure if you're going to have a solid answer, but thankfully I got some options, even though I do think I know what your answer will be. But with a lot of different new stars kind of rising up, have you come across any new nicknames that you're a big fan of? I dropped one last week with like the Dyson Daniels Great Barrier Thief. The one that I would assume for you would be Connect Four, just because you've been a big fan of the Lakers Connect. For me personally, it's Area 51 with Wemby and Castle. Just the two guys out there. I find these fun names. Has anything kind of caught your eye, or kind of have I caught you off guard?
You've literally just educated me on all the new nicknames that are available. Well, all of which are spectacular. Honestly, those are good. I like the use of the numbers to make the connection there. That's a good
Yeah,
one. That's a good one. Yeah, I mean,
there was
nothing in particular.
one that I won't repeat. That was a Bronny one. The lay something, but we'll leave that one. You guys got to go search and find that one. So it's not X-rated, but we don't need to get that dirty.
I'm
So,
sure he gets enough nicknames without
oh,
us.
yeah, he
Without
does.
us.
Well, that's going to wrap it up here for the Bucket Bros. Any last words or remarks, Bobby? Anything you're excited for in the next week?
Just keep watching Hoop. Keep tuning in. Thank you for all the viewers. Anything that you want us to focus on, any tips, any numbers you want to send our way, please, we'll include it. And yeah, if you got a small business, you're looking for a shout out, especially in the Chicagoland, Charlotte area, please send it our way.
All right. That's dedication. Bobby, go take care of your kid. Your wife's calling you. We all can hear it. We will see you guys next episode on the Bucket Bros.
Bye, everybody.
Go, go, go.